Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Today we're thinking about the parable of the 10 virgins. As Jesus talks about this, it becomes very important that we focus on being prepared. I remember growing up and always hearing the Boy Scout motto, always be prepared. And as you think about that, there are a lot of different contexts in which we think about the need to be prepared. For a lot of us, when we were in school and we were that young age where you first hear that, the first thought is, I need to have my assignments in order. When I go to school, I need to have all the proper materials. And that was something that was always stressed to us when we went to class. Make sure you have a pencil, make sure you have paper, make sure you bring your textbook to class. And then as we grow older, it becomes important for us to be prepared in other ways. I remember one of the first things that my parents got me to put in the back of my first vehicle as I started driving. It was a little emergency safety kit. And it had all sorts of random things in it to me, but over the years have proved pretty useful. And so being prepared moved from something that you do at school when you have responsibilities to now that you have a car to maintain, there are responsibilities that come along with that. And then as adults, I think that our need for preparedness has escalated in a lot of ways. Now we feel the need to be prepared for our future. And we stress in our minds and to other people the importance of saving and investing and making sure that our future is taken care of. And a lot of us, we think about safety, how we need to prepare to be safe. When there's bad weather, we prepare for safety. When we do certain things, we prepare to make sure that we are taken care of. And even as we think about our daily lives, we see how important it is for us to prepare ourselves. Whether that's in the way that we get dressed for the day, whether it's the way that we keep a checklist of things that must be done so we're prepared for the work week ahead. For a lot of us, we are busy, and so we put stuff in the crock pot so that we are prepared for supper time when the long day is done. Preparation takes a lot of different shapes throughout our lives, but one thing that we can appreciate is the simplicity of the story that Jesus talks about here in Matthew 25 when he talks about the need for us to be prepared. Let's read these words of Jesus together. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves." And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered, "Truly, I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." And I think one of the first things as we read this, and even as we contemplate the title that we've given to this parable, the parable of the 10 virgins, for us in a modern sense, maybe we are perplexed as to why we have called it this. And virginity here is not referring to the way in which we normally talk about virginity in the 21st century and in our culture. Here instead, it's a designation of their age, not about their sexuality. A really helpful way for us to think about who these ladies are in this parable is they're more like what we would call bridesmaids. They are there to attend and like the way as this new bride and her groom march from her parents' house where they've had a ceremony to his house where they're going to have a marriage feast following the ceremony. And so this is a quote that I found especially helpful about the background information that helps us to kind of understand where Jesus is coming from and contextualize it as we read this parable. The scene is a village wedding with the virgins, perhaps bridesmaids in our sense, or friends or servants of the bridegroom, waiting to escort the bridegroom in a torchlight procession at the end of the ceremony as he brings his bride home. And immediately Jesus begins to build some tension in this story. He says there are 10 bridesmaids and 5 of them are foolish and 5 are wise. And immediately as you listen to this and you think about the story for the first time, we automatically begin to wonder, well, why are some of them wise and why are some of them foolish? Well, it's very obvious when you hear the detail. Some of them bring extra oil for their lamps and some don't. And it's this designation that some have extra oil so that they don't run out, and some really haven't prepared themselves. Jesus says that's the difference. Now, when I grew up hearing this parable, I always wondered, well, why don't some share? But there's 2 problems here. First, the main point of the parable is about preparation, not about sharing. And we talked a lot about the purpose of parables, and so understanding this is what Jesus is getting at helps us. But also I think that if that were the case, Jesus would have talked about the 5 needy bridesmaids and the 5 selfish bridesmaids. That's not Jesus' point. He says there are 5 who are wise because they brought proper supplies, everything was ready, and 5 were foolish because they didn't bring everything that they knew they should have brought. Had things progressed rather quickly, had the bridegroom come on when they expected him to, maybe this wouldn't have been a big deal. But as it is, Jesus says that the bridegroom was delayed. And there are all sorts of things that can happen during a wedding ceremony where maybe things get a little delayed. Have you ever been at a ceremony where there was something that happened and there was a delay? Maybe the power goes off and there's that moment of what are we going to do? I remember I performed a wedding years ago. I won't tell you who it was for, but the bride forgot the groom's ring in the condo. It was a beach wedding. And so her brother had to run all the way up the boardwalk and go all the way back to the condo, get the ring, and then run it all the way back to his sister on the beach. There are a lot of things that can delay a ceremony, but Jesus doesn't tell us what happened, and it really doesn't matter. The point is that these bridesmaids were waiting, but the groom didn't come as quickly as they thought. Now, this runs into a problem, but it's not really actually the problem. It says they all get drowsy and they fall asleep. And for some of us, maybe we're thinking, oh, they should have stayed up, they should have waited. But that doesn't seem to be the problem here. Because as soon as the cry, here comes the bridegroom, is heard, come out and meet him, everybody gets awake, everybody is ready, except when they get ready to start lighting their lamps. And then the foolish women realize we don't have the supplies we ought. And the others, it says, can't share, because if they were to share, then everybody would end up being in the dark. There's not enough oil to go around and fill everybody's lamps. So what do you do? Well, the wise ones tell the foolish ones, you need to just go to the store and get more oil. And so they do, but by the time they get back, the wedding feast has started. The doors have been locked and they knock, they bang on the door, and here comes the cry back. I don't know who you are. And this is maybe something pretty typical in this culture. Once this wedding party has assembled for the feast, they lock up all the doors. And it's just a safety reason. We don't want intruders to come in and disturb our party. We want to be able to do our own thing without any worry. And so their problem is that they are locked out, not because the groom won't let them in, but he has locked them out because they weren't there when they were supposed to be. They weren't prepared. They weren't ready. And so as we step back and we ask, what is this all about? What does this mean? Jesus makes it very clear if you're reading the context of Matthew. If you go back to chapter 24, you'll notice beginning in verse 36, this is what it says. But concerning day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son of Man, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. And what inevitably has happened over the course of the years of history is people say, I have figured out when the return of Christ will be. I figured it out. There is a hidden message in the Bible and I have cracked the code. I've done the math. I've done this. I have figured it out. And of course, if you're reading the words of Jesus, you know that those people are just blowing hot air. There's no way for us to know what that time is. Jesus says the angels don't know more than that. Jesus himself doesn't know that hour that he will be returning, but only God the Father knows. And so his lesson to the people listening here is always be ready. Now, this is difficult because at some point, Jesus is going to make his return. For the people first hearing, they have died and gone. And all the people who have died up to this point, they have met God in judgment. And we don't know when the end of the world is coming. Again, only Jesus knows. But Jesus' message is it could be any time. The problem is in the New Testament age that Christians thought it could be so soon that they really didn't do anything. They sat around and they were waiting, just waiting on the return of Christ. That's the whole reason why Paul writes first to the Thessalonians. He says, you still have to live your life. Yes, Jesus is going to return. We don't know when it is. You've got to live your life. And so the problem is that now all of these years later, we have become so comfortable with the fact that, someday Jesus is coming. But maybe we have forgotten to be prepared right now. Maybe we have failed to keep our lamps ready, to keep our oil ready, to have everything in hand so that if Jesus came in this moment, we would be ready. And so Jesus ends this parable in verse 13. He says, watch therefore, for you don't know the day or the hour. Watch therefore. Be ready, be watchful, be alert, but have everything prepared. And so as we end, I want us to focus on 3 questions for our own lives and for our own hearts. The first is, are we prepared? Are we prepared? Remember, having a lamp is not enough. Some of us would say, as we watch this video, well, I have a relationship with Jesus. I have been saved. Remember, a lamp is not enough. Unless you have the oil, unless you have everything that keeps that relationship up with Jesus, unless you have what it takes to keep up your salvation, because you're faithfully living for the Lord. Not that that makes you earn your salvation, but it keeps us in God's good grace. I hope that as we watch this, we ask ourselves, am I actually prepared? If the Lord were to return now, would I be ready? The second question is kind of like it, and it piggybacks off of it in a lot of ways. The question is, are we watchful? Are we waiting with anticipation for the Lord to come back? Maybe a good question for us to ask is, do we want Jesus to come back right now? Throughout the New Testament, it's presented to us as if Christians, of course, are going to be waiting and eagerly waiting for the return of Christ. Is that the attitude that we have in the 21st century? Are we excited about the fact that there is a time coming when Jesus will come and he will bring us away from this world with all of its problems, all of its troubles, and we'll be reunited with God face to face again in the kingdom of heaven? The last thing I want to ask, and this is the way that Jesus phrases this. There were 5 foolish bridesmaids, and there were 5 wise bridesmaids. When it comes down to our preparation, when it comes to our anticipation, ultimately will we be found to be wise or foolish? We know what it would look like for us to be ready for the return. But when it actually comes, will we be seen as wise people because we did what was necessary to be ready for the return of Jesus? Or rather, will we be foolish, knowing what we should do the whole time and never doing it? Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope it's been helpful as we think about the need for us in our own lives to be prepared for the return of Christ.